The first time I met Cole Renner, I was covered in clay, had dried paint on my chin, and was frantically trying to keep a dozen kids from turning the town art studio into a modern abstract disaster. And yet, in the chaos of that Tuesday afternoon art class, he noticed me. My name is Naya Benton, and I'm 32 years old. I run a small, non-profit arts center called Canvas and Light in the heart of Eastbrook, a blue-collar district in the city of Wellingford. It's not glamorous, there are leaky pipes, flickering lights, and I pay more in paint supplies than I probably should, but it's mine. Every chipped tile and mismatched chair holds a story, and every day I walk through those doors, I remember why I chose this life. That day, Cole had wandered in looking for a community project his company could sponsor. He was all tailored lines and polished shoes, with a disarming smile and the kind of confidence you only see in people who know exactly where they're going. His firm, Renner Equity, was one of the biggest real estate investment groups in the state, a world as far from mine as velvet is from burlap. But something clicked. Maybe it was the way he crouched beside a 7-year-old covered in finger paint and asked about her dragon drawing like it was high art. Maybe it was the way he stayed long after his assistant left, helping clean up without being asked. Whatever it was, by the end of that week, he'd signed a 6-month partnership contract, and asked me to dinner. We dated quietly at first, balancing gallery openings with weekend farmers markets, his world slowly merging with mine. He loved how I lost myself in my work, and I admired his drive, how even in boardrooms he could advocate for underfunded housing initiatives. I fell for him hard. But I knew, deep down, that someone like Cole came with a world attached. I met his mother, Eleanor Renner, 6 months into our relationship. If Cole was the architect of his empire, Eleanor was its gatekeeper. A former fashion editor turned philanthropist, she commanded attention the way a chandelier commands light. Her words were always elegant, her tone warm, but beneath the smile was a steel wire of control that never loosened. She invited me to tea at her penthouse in Wellingford Heights, a world apart from Eastbrook's graffiti-sprayed underpasses and corner bakeries. I arrived early, wearing a modest navy dress, my hair pinned neatly, clutching a bouquet of peonies as a thank you. I was nervous, but hopeful. The apartment was stunning. All white marble and crystal. Even the teacups had gold rims. Eleanor sat across from me in a pearl-stitched blouse, sipping her herbal blend as though evaluating a new acquisition. "So," she said, "you run a youth arts facility, is that right?" I nodded, smiling. "Yes, it's a community center, free classes for children, weekend exhibitions, and rotating residencies for local artists." "How noble," she replied, her tone polite, but with a glint of something else. "And you were raised where?" "In Riverside Terrace," I said. "It's about 20 blocks south of here." Her eyebrows lifted, ever so slightly. "I see. Quite the journey, then." I understood what she meant. Eleanor believed in pedigree. The kind of background that came with family names engraved on granite university plaques and holiday homes in Italy. To her, I was unfamiliar. Unrefined. A visitor in a world she had spent decades curating. Cole didn't seem to notice, or maybe he chose not to. "She's old school," he would say whenever I hinted at her subtle disapproval. "She'll come around." But she didn't. Not really. At family functions, she introduced me as Naya, the teacher, ignoring the fact that I ran a program with 3 city grants and 2 national awards. She once gifted me a book titled Elegance, How to Carry Yourself Like a Lady of Worth. And when Cole told her he was considering proposing, I overheard her on the phone, her voice too low for him to hear, but loud enough for me. "Darling," she said, "this girl is lovely, yes. But is she suitable?" That word stuck in my brain like a splinter. Still, when Cole proposed, on the balcony of the studio, surrounded by fairy lights and a few dozen children's drawings, I said yes. Because I loved him. Because he believed in us. Because I wanted to. But I also knew I had to be ready. The weeks leading up to the engagement party were a blur of floral samples, seating charts, and whispered comments from Eleanor. I kept my smile steady, my voice even. But inside, I was watching. Recording. Preparing. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted the truth to be seen, for Cole's sake as much as mine. Eleanor didn't insult me directly. She wasn't brash or loud. Her disapproval came in carefully wrapped compliments, in eyebrow arches, and pauses just a second too long. At the dress consultation she invited herself to, she remarked, "This gown is charming. Though I wonder if something less whimsical might elevate the silhouette?" At the cake tasting, fruit fillings can be difficult to keep elegant. Perhaps something more classic for such a setting? Even at the invitation printing, "Do you think your family will be comfortable at the Renner estate? It's quite formal." It wore me down. Not because I didn't think I belonged, but because I knew she didn't want me to. And that realization made every smile I forced feel like a small betrayal of myself. One evening, after a particularly exhausting planning meeting, I vented to my friend Kira, my co-director at Canvas and Light and my oldest friend. "You need to document this," she said. "Not for revenge. For clarity. For proof." So I did. Over the next few weeks, with Kira's help, I began collecting quiet moments. Phone recordings. Notes. Snippets of conversation from Eleanor's more candid remarks, when Cole was out of earshot. She's creative, but let's not forget that creativity doesn't build legacies. Cole's kindness makes him vulnerable. He sees a story and forgets the consequences. She won't last. Art fades. I didn't respond. I simply watched. Logged. Waited. Because I knew that if Eleanor tried to erase who I was in front of everyone we loved, I would be ready to paint the full picture. And I wouldn't need a brush to do it. The engagement party was held at the Renner estate, of course. A sprawling, ivy-draped mansion nestled in the prestigious Olmsted Heights district, the estate was more museum than home. Marble fountains flanked the circular driveway, while inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled above vintage velvet armchairs. It was the kind of place where you didn't sit unless someone told you to. I arrived with my mother, Talia, on my arm. A retired nurse and the strongest person I know, she wore the same silver pendant she'd worn to every one of my gallery exhibitions, her quiet pride radiating louder than any designer gown. Cole greeted us with that wide, grounding smile that always made me feel like we were alone in a room, no matter how many eyes watched. He looked perfect, elegant but relaxed, the kind of man who could wear confidence like a second skin. When he kissed my forehead and whispered, "You look like you walked out of a dream," it was all I could do not to melt into him. Eleanor floated toward us, dressed in an immaculately tailored lavender sheath dress, the neckline so sharp it could have cut glass. She greeted my mother with polite formality, never warmth, and then turned to me. "Naya," she said, brushing a non-existent speck from her sleeve, "what a lovely gown. Very expressive." "It's inspired by Frida Kahlo," I replied calmly. "A tribute to unapologetic women." Her smile faltered just slightly before she responded, "How bold." It was always like that with Eleanor, phrases that sounded like praise but weren't. Compliments engineered to put you in your place. Her conversations were like porcelain, elegant, fragile, and cold to the touch. The party was as extravagant as expected. A jazz trio played beneath the arching ceilings, servers weaved through the crowd with silver trays, and the guest list read like the who's who of Wellingford's elite. I recognized a few patrons from the gallery, people who smiled at me now but rarely remembered my name when I wasn't standing beside Cole. Kira arrived late, sliding in through the back entrance as planned. She wasn't dressed for the occasion, not really, black jumpsuit, simple earrings, but that was intentional. She wasn't there to charm. She was there to observe. We had a plan. About an hour in, after the toasts and delicate laughter, Eleanor approached me with 2 glasses of her signature spiced tea, imported, steeped precisely, and served in porcelain cups with her initials engraved on the rim. She offered one to me. To new beginnings, she said. I took the cup. To honesty, I replied, and we both sipped. She led me toward the garden, where guests wandered among hedges sculpted like Greek goddesses and lanterns floated gently over koi ponds. It was quiet there, far from the clinking of champagne flutes and the buzz of polite society. Eleanor leaned in slightly, her voice softer now, as though she were speaking to a child. You've handled yourself well this evening. Composed. Tactful, she said. Thank you, I replied, matching her calm. But I must ask, do you really believe you're prepared for this life? This name? I believe I'm prepared for love, I said. The rest is just wallpaper. She smiled tightly. Wallpaper can peel. And there it was, the mask slipping, ever so slightly. You've done well with your little art center, she continued. But the Renner legacy is built on pillars. Foundations. Not finger paint. I held my breath, not because I was shocked, I'd heard this all before, but because the microphone clipped discreetly beneath my necklace was picking up every word. Kira sat nearby on a stone bench, pretending to scroll through her phone, the signal receiver blinking softly in her handbag. I'm not here for your legacy, I said. I'm here for Cole. That's precisely what concerns me. The conversation ended shortly after that. She excused herself to check on the caterers, leaving me standing by the garden pond, tea cooling in my hand, heart steady. I had what I needed. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor's subtle attacks escalated. There were last-minute changes to the seating chart that displaced my family. Wedding vendors who suddenly couldn't accommodate our requests. A mysterious loss of our rehearsal dinner reservation. Cole tried to handle it quietly. But Eleanor was always one step ahead. She's just overwhelmed, he said one night, rubbing his temples. This wedding's more pressure on her than I realized. I didn't respond. Because by then, I understood something Cole didn't. Eleanor wasn't overwhelmed. She was orchestrating. So I orchestrated, too. The wedding was scheduled for late spring, in the lush outdoor garden of a local historic estate. Eleanor had originally insisted on a grand ballroom in the city, but I pushed back. This was our day, and I wouldn't let it be turned into a display case. The night before the ceremony, Kira and I finalized everything. Laptop. Projector. Audio files. Backup copies. Everything was ready. You don't have to go through with it, she said as we reviewed our checklist. You could just let her fade into the background after the wedding. I shook my head. She's not the background. She's the storm. And I'm tired of pretending it's just rain. Kira reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Then let's bring the thunder. The morning of the wedding, I woke to soft light spilling through the windows of the guest cottage where my mother, Kira, and I had stayed the night before. The garden was already being prepared, rows of wooden chairs facing a blooming archway of lavender and ivy. My dress, a cream-colored A-line with embroidered wildflowers, hung near the window. It wasn't couture. It wasn't designed by someone famous. But it was handmade by a local seamstress who listened to my story and wove my mother's old scarf into the inner lining. It was perfect. As I got ready, my mother whispered, "You don't have to prove anything, Naya." "I know," I said. "But I do have to protect something." The ceremony was beautiful. Cole cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. My mother beamed. Kira gave me a thumbs up from the front row. But I wasn't thinking about Eleanor. Not yet. That came later, at the reception. When she stood up to speak. When the crowd went quiet. When she looked at me with those same tight eyes and said, "Let us raise a glass to new beginnings. Even ones that take some getting used to." Even then, I didn't flinch. Because I knew what was coming. I had seen the frame. Now it was time to reveal the painting. The ballroom was silent. Eleanor Renner stood beneath the soft shimmer of chandelier light, her champagne flute raised delicately between her fingers. She wore her signature expression, a poised, polished half-smile that could be mistaken for grace by anyone who hadn't been on the receiving end of her sharper words. "To new beginnings," she said smoothly, her gaze scanning the guests. I stood next to Cole, bouquet in hand, expression calm. My heartbeat, though steady, thundered in my ears like a war drum. I caught Kira's eye from across the room. She was already in position by the AV table, hand resting on the laptop, just waiting for my signal. Eleanor continued, her words laced with sugar and subtle blades. Tonight, we celebrate the joining of two remarkable individuals. My son, Cole, brilliant and compassionate. And Naya. She paused, her voice softening with rehearsed sincerity. A woman of strong spirit, who brings color to our lives. A ripple of polite laughter ran through the room. I tilted my head slightly. She was clever, always clever. That last word, color, wasn't just about my art or my dresses. It was about where I came from. About what I wasn't. But as we toast to this union, she said, stepping a bit closer to our table, let us remember that love is not just a feeling. It's a legacy. And some legacies, like our families, require careful preservation. That was it. My cue. I stepped forward, gently placed my bouquet on the table, and took the mic from the stand beside the band. Thank you, Eleanor, I said, my voice ringing clear through the room. What a beautiful toast. But before we continue, I'd like to share something, too. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. She looked at Cole, then back to me. I nodded toward Kira. She moved quickly, seamlessly. A few taps on the laptop, and the ballroom screen behind the stage flickered to life. I turned to the guests, my voice steady. Sometimes, before you begin a life together, you have to be willing to show the whole picture. Not just the polished frame. The room dimmed. On the screen, a video began to play. It started simple. Eleanor seated at her kitchen counter, speaking on the phone with someone, her tone low but not cautious. She's a pleasant girl, she said, swirling tea in her cup. But let's not pretend this will last. Cole always had a soft spot for the underdog. A few people in the room stirred. Whispers spread. The next clip was from a boutique meeting, captured on Kira's phone during a wedding planning session. Eleanor smiled at the consultant, gesturing toward a rack of dresses. Nothing too ostentatious, she said. We don't want the wedding to feel improvised. She already stands out enough. There were no laughs this time. Clip after clip rolled, remarks laced with classism, quiet jabs at my upbringing, comments about respectability and what a Renner woman should represent. She's passionate, sure, Eleanor said in one. But art isn't a foundation for a family. It's a hobby. She'll learn. Or he'll move on. Then came the final recording. Eleanor, sitting on a garden bench outside a charity event, unaware of the microphone clipped to a flower pin on Kira's coat. I don't intend to make a scene, she said. Just enough to remind everyone who we are. A touch of embarrassment, an accident with a dress, perhaps. Cole will come to his senses. The screen went black. Silence. All eyes turned to Eleanor. Her mouth was slightly open, the mask gone. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Fragile, even. She tried to speak. These are taken out of context. You don't understand the pressure. I do, I said, cutting her off gently but firmly. I understand perfectly. I turned to the guests again. I came into this family knowing I was different. That I didn't fit the mold of what some people expected. But I also came with love. With integrity. And with the belief that I could build something meaningful, even if I didn't come from marble floors and country clubs. I looked at Cole. And he loved me not in spite of my roots, but because of them. Cole stood, his eyes never leaving mine. Then he turned to his mother. I defended you, he said quietly. I told Naya you just needed time. That you'd come around. But you weren't waiting to come around. You were planning to sabotage her. To hurt the woman I love. Eleanor's voice cracked. I was trying to protect you. No, he said. You were trying to control me. She looked around the room, searching for support, for sympathy, but all she found was silence and cold eyes. Even her old friends turned their gaze downward, unable or unwilling to come to her defense. And then my mother stood up. Naya Benton, in a soft blue dress, walked forward with a quiet strength that made the room lean in. "I may not own a penthouse," she said, standing beside me, "but I raised a woman who stands with dignity when others try to tear her down. Who tells the truth even when it costs her comfort. That's a legacy, too." Kira and several others applauded. And like a dam cracking, the room broke into a chorus of claps, not polite, but powerful. The kind that rises from conviction. Eleanor stepped back, her face a mask of defeat. Cole turned to her one final time. "I'm sorry, Mom. But if being a Renner means losing the woman I love, then maybe that name doesn't mean what I thought it did." Eleanor said nothing. Just turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. This time, no one followed her. The rest of the night didn't feel like a party. It felt like a beginning. Guests came up to me, offering kind words, hugs, apologies for what they hadn't seen before. And Cole? He stayed by my side the entire time, never letting go of my hand. "You were incredible," he whispered, resting his forehead against mine. "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." I smiled, exhausted but free. "No more masks," I said. "No more hiding. Never again." And as we danced under dimmed lights, the rain began to fall gently outside the ballroom windows, like the sky itself was washing it all away. The days that followed the wedding felt like waking up after a long, cold storm. There was wreckage, some visible, some buried deep, but there was also light, gentle and new, filtering through places that had been dark for far too long. Cole and I didn't go on a grand honeymoon. We didn't jet off to Bali or Venice. Instead, we took 3 days off and stayed in a quiet cabin outside Wellingford, tucked between tall pines and a still lake. We barely spoke about the wedding drama. We just existed. Took long walks. Shared quiet meals. Held each other in the silence, healing piece by piece. Back in the city, the Renner name was buzzing, but not in the way it used to. Eleanor's social circle had fractured. Some of her long-standing allies distanced themselves. Others, particularly the younger crowd, openly admired the way I had stood up for myself. More than one gallery owner reached out, inviting me to speak or collaborate. But I didn't feel triumphant. Just steady. Cole moved out of his family's condo and into our shared apartment in Eastbrook. It was cramped and colorful, filled with mismatched furniture, potted plants, and drying art projects from the center. For someone who had grown up around chandeliers and staff, Cole adjusted with surprising ease. "This place has heart," he said one night, kicking off his shoes and sitting cross-legged on the floor beside me. "I finally feel like I'm living in a real home." He meant it. I could see it in the way he smiled while doing dishes, the way he helped repaint the studio's peeling window frames on Sundays, the way he showed up for my students' first community art showcase in paint-splattered jeans. As for Eleanor, for weeks, we didn't hear a word from her. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Naya. "There is no excuse for how I treated you. I was cruel, and worse, I was blind. You held a mirror up to me, and I didn't like what I saw. But I needed to see it. If you are open to it, I'd like to start again, not as your mother-in-law, but simply as someone who's willing to listen and learn. Eleanor." I sat on the studio steps with that letter in my lap for a long time. It wasn't an apology filled with excuses. It didn't demand forgiveness. It just acknowledged the truth. I didn't reply right away. But I didn't throw it away either. Weeks later, she invited my mother to lunch. Talia called me afterward, sounding surprised. She was nervous, she said. Didn't touch her wine. Spent most of the time talking about you, about how she's started seeing a therapist. Said she's trying to understand the difference between pride and control. That night, I stared at the ceiling beside Cole, our fingers laced between us. "Do people really change?" I asked. "Some don't," he said. "But some want to." And that counts for something. Eventually, I agreed to meet Eleanor. At a cafe. No grand gestures. No cameras. Just two women trying to rebuild from the ashes. She arrived early. No makeup. No designer suit. Just a simple cardigan and tired eyes. "I hurt you," she said quietly. "And I won't ask for your forgiveness. But I'd like to earn your respect." We talked for over an hour. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend. She just listened. And for the first time, I felt like she truly saw me, not as an obstacle, but as a person. Cole and I went on to build the kind of marriage I once thought was only for stories. Not perfect, but real. Strong. Filled with paint splatters and midnight laughter and the kind of trust that can only be forged in fire. The Renner name still carried weight. But I carried my name with pride, too. And together, we carried each other. 3 years passed in quiet, meaningful strokes, like brush strokes on a canvas too large to understand until you step back. Cole and I made a life from scratch in Eastbrook. We didn't seek opulence or applause. We filled our home with warmth, laughter, and art supplies. He traded tailored suits for rolled-up sleeves and learned to brew the perfect French press. I expanded canvas and light, opening a second location 2 blocks from the first. Our programs now reached over 100 children each semester, many of whom reminded me of the little girl I once was, scrappy, curious, and underestimated. We didn't talk about Eleanor much. But we didn't avoid her either. She had changed, not entirely, not overnight, but slowly, like spring thawing frost. She attended therapy regularly and volunteered with a youth mentorship nonprofit downtown. Her first donation to our center came anonymously. The second came with a note. "For the kids who see beauty where others only see survival. Thank you for teaching me the difference." Sometimes she joined us for Sunday lunches. She never commented on the decor or the food. She didn't correct me, didn't direct me. She simply listened. She even brought a sketchbook once, something she hadn't touched since her 20s. I watched her sketch the fruit bowl on our table with trembling hands and quiet humility. For the first time, she wasn't trying to control anything. She was trying to connect. That meant something. Not everything. But something. It was a foggy October morning when I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the edge of the tub in our tiny bathroom, one hand over my mouth, the other holding the test. The lines weren't faint. They were solid. Certain. My heart thudded against my ribs like a drum in a parade. When Cole came home that evening, his tie slung around his neck and paint under his fingernails from helping set up a gallery wall, I simply placed the test in his palm. He stared at it. Blinked once. Then looked at me like I was the most miraculous thing he'd ever seen. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sure," I said, tears already welling. He pulled me into his arms and we just stood there, swaying in the tiny kitchen like it was a dance floor made for two. Our daughter, Iris Eleanor Renner, was born on a rainy Tuesday night the following summer. She entered the world howling, tiny fists clenched, hair sticking up like feathers from a bird too wild to tame. Holding her was like holding every version of myself I had ever tried to protect. The studio celebrated her birth with hand-painted banners and a welcome, Iris mural stretching across the wall, painted by the children themselves, full of flowers, stars, and tiny dragons. Cole cried when he saw it. I did too. We didn't buy a new house. We didn't need one. We cleared out the second bedroom, painted the walls soft green, and hung framed sketches by our students. My mother helped sew curtains. Eleanor surprised us with a restored rocking chair, one that had belonged to her grandmother. "This time," she said gently, "I'd like to get things right from the start." I nodded, surprised by how easily my heart softened. As Iris grew, our world grew with her. We learned to operate on less sleep, more coffee, and a never-ending supply of baby wipes. But we were happy, sincerely, quietly, deeply happy. I returned to the studio part-time, teaching 2 days a week while Cole took on freelance consulting from home. On weekends, we strolled the city markets with Iris in a wrap across my chest and paint smudges still on our hands from morning projects. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Eastbrook skyline, casting long golden shadows across our balcony, I sat with Iris in my lap and my sketchbook open. She reached for my pencil, her chubby fingers wrapping around it like it was a magic wand. I let her scribble. It was nonsense, of course, wild spirals and squiggly lines. But I kept the page. Taped it to the fridge. Because it was hers. Because it was a beginning. Cole came outside, his arm draped with a dish towel, and kissed my temple. "She's going to be just like you," he said. "I hope not," I replied with a grin. "I hope she's bolder. Braver. She'll have you to teach her that," he said. "And me to cheer her on." I rested my head against his shoulder. "That's our legacy," I whispered. Legacy, I had come to learn, wasn't something you inherited. It wasn't a name etched into marble or a family crest embroidered onto silk. It wasn't handed down in antique brooches or hidden inside penthouses. It was built, in small choices, in quiet strength, in truth spoken aloud even when your voice shakes. My daughter would grow up knowing that. She would know that her mother once stood in a ballroom, coffee-drenched and humiliated, but refused to bend. That she chose love, not by enduring cruelty, but by standing beside someone who fought to understand and grow with her. She would know that pride is earned, not inherited. And that elegance, the kind that lasts, comes not from pearls or posture, but from kindness. From courage. From art and fire and forgiveness. That was the legacy we chose. And as I looked at Cole holding our daughter beneath the setting sun, I knew it was the most beautiful work of art we had ever created.